You know, it's not without some measure of trepidation that I stand up here to provide a brief presentation on the security situation in Somalia. And my expertise on the subject pales in comparison to this audience, particularly since we have representatives from AMISOM member nations among us. However, the positive is that we should have a lively question and answer session afterwards, as I fully expect to be challenged in the remarks I make. There are two schools of thought right now in the state of Al-Shabaab and its impact on the security situation in Somalia. The first asserts that Al-Shabaab is on the decline and that the successes of AMISOM have weakened the movement, diminished its support, and now it struggles for survival and relevance. The other is that Al-Shabaab has merely adapted to the environment, consolidated its power, achieved more unity of effort, and continues as a viable existential security threat to the federal government of Somalia. Regardless of which narrative one subscribes to, the reality is the threat has changed. Since late 2010, Al-Shabaab has mounted few conventional type offensive operations. I think this is attributable to the capability of AMISOM. Al-Shabaab rightly concluded that it cannot take on AMISOM forces in a conventional fight and win. The result is that Al-Shabaab adapted and adopted asymmetrical tactics as a counter to a larger conventional force opponent. And of course, this is to be expected. That's the norm. So if you think about Al-Shabaab's high-profile attacks over the past year, the Mogadishu courthouse in April of 2013, the UN compound last June, the Turkish embassy in July, Westgate Mall last September, Villa Somalia this past February, and then most recently the Parliament building on May 24th, these are not the type of attacks that can easily be countered by conventional force operations. The vast majority of incidents attributed to Al-Shabaab on a recurring basis in Somalia are IED and grenade attacks, assassinations, and bombings. When conventional forces are confronted with an asymmetrical threat, the result is that they become reactive versus proactive. But that is not to say that the conventional force engagements are not taking place in Somalia. They are. But unfortunately, those firefights are occurring when elements of the new Somali National Army are fighting each other. There have been two such incidents in just the past 10 days. So why do I highlight these facts? One, that the threat presented by Al-Shabaab is a hybrid threat, adopted to counter the straits of AMISOM. And two, that the SNA is experiencing infighting and clan-based divisions. Is it to suggest that AMISOM and conventional forces are ineffective in providing security for the Somali people? Or that the SNA is a failed experiment that will never successfully exist as an inter-clan organization with national loyalty and allegiance? No. I don't think either of those is correct. The presence of AMISOM remains vital to the security of Somali people, and over time, I believe Somalia can build a national army. However, what I want to talk with you about is strategic leadership in the security sector, particularly within the context of Somalia. I want us to think about the idea of ends, ways, and means, and whether or not the strategic leaders are making sound strategic decisions. As we discussed on Wednesday, the first step for a national security strategy is to identify what are the interests worth protecting and what are the threats that must be countered. Or as General Casey noted during our first plenary session on Monday, we must clearly articulate our vision and convey exactly what it is we are trying to achieve. In other words, the ends. Now, the Somali National Security and Stabilization Plan, the NSSP, which is a pretty good document if you haven't read it, includes a vision statement. It reads, quote, "A secure and enabled federated Somalia is in lasting peace with itself and with its neighbors, enjoying restored security, access to justice and the rule of law, upholding the human rights of its citizens, accountable, able to defend its constitution, people, territorial integrity, and unity," close quote. And in support of this vision, the NSSP lists as one of its strategic objectives, quote, to rebuild affordable, accountable, and professional defense, army, security, and justice agencies and institutions, close quote. So this is where Somalia wants to go. And if we accept that strategic decisions are decisions made today to achieve effects in the future, let's examine for a few minutes some of the decisions and course of actions that are being implemented today. First is the creation of the Somali National Army. There seems to be a consensus from almost everyone that we need to create a Somali National Army. There's an EU training center in Jazeera just outside Mogadishu Airport. AMISOM's doing some training. I read 2 days ago that Tanzania is now doing some training. There's a U.S. private company called Bancroft, which is training a company they're calling the Danab Company. So there's all these people training to build an SNA. Even Ban Ki-moon stated that in order to attain the minimum security conditions required for peace consolidation, there needs to be a major enhancement of the Somali National Security Forces. The AMISOM Force Commander recently stated that it was necessary to bolster the Somali National Security Forces to be capable of eventually taking the lead in operations against al-Shabaab as part of AMISOM's exit strategy. So the way ahead's clear, right? Al-Shabaab is down. It's almost out. Now the next step is to build a Somali National Army to replace AMISOM and take over responsibility for maintaining security. Not so fast. Remember, the threat from al-Shabaab right now is asymmetrical. AMISOM itself has stated that it's not sufficiently organized and equipped to deal with the existing threat, and that it has, quote, reached its operational limit, close quote. It lacks key enablers like ISR, helicopters, medical evacuation, logistics, and maintenance support. And again, Ban Ki-moon said it's not realistic for AMISOM to achieve the desired effect of resuming the military campaign without additional air assets. Yet the exit strategy for AMISOM is to rapidly train the SNA to take over. I stated earlier that strategic decisions are not decisions made to resolve the challenges of today, but the challenges of the future. However, it would seem that the focus of building the SNA is not even about today. It's about yesterday, based on the security environment that existed 3 years ago. So why do we do this? There seems to be a knee-jerk reaction to build an army. Look at what we did in Liberia. We built an army. In Libya, they're building a general purpose force. South Sudan, Mali, build an army. First order of business is always build or rebuild the army. Let me ask you this. Is a strong and capable Somali National Army the key to preventing a resurgence of al-Shabaab? Do you think Boko Haram exists and persists because the Nigerian armed forces are weak? They're one of the strongest militaries on the African continent. So why the knee-jerk reaction to start building an army? I think we do it for two reasons. First, we focus too much on the recent events that created the crisis, thus implementing a course of action to address the past. And two, it's easier than building a capable police force and creating rule of law. Militaries can train other militaries. Training is one of the core competencies of a military. On the other hand, police forces, they operate. They're out there being policemen. Sure, there's police training academies, there's law enforcement training on techniques and skills, but by and large, it's not something that law enforcement organizations do on the scale and with the experience of militaries. So am I saying that Somalia does not need a national army? No. However, is it being built within the framework of a strategic plan for the security sector? If everyone up to the Secretary General of the United Nations is saying that we need more enablers, not more conventional forces, why are we creating SNA infantry companies and battalions and organizing them into brigades? How many logistics companies have been trained and employed? Medical units. These are the type of units that are not only the foundation of a future SNA that's capable and self-sufficient, but it's the kind of SNA and AMISOM partnership that can create effects right now and create effects for the future. So speaking of a strategic framework for the security sector, let's take a quick look at the security sector situation in Somalia as it exists. Okay, you have AMISOM. It's a relatively capable force, but lacking in key enablers. You got a fledgling SNA that seems intent on fighting each other, yet not capable of counting the asymmetric threat posed by al-Shabaab. And of course, I haven't mentioned it yet, the clan militias. Then let's not forget the private security companies. And although these are oftentimes indistinguishable from clan militias, they need to be addressed as a distinct entity for several reasons. The clan militias. Just like the apparent consensus on building the SNA, everyone seems equally convinced that an immediate need is to disarm the militias or integrate the militia members into a representative national army. Okay, even if we accept that the desired end state is a country free of clan-based militias, do the ways and means currently exist to make that happen anytime soon? This has been the state of affairs in Somalia since the fall of Siad Barre. The clan militias have been around so long, they're the new normal. So what is to be done? To me, it all comes down to one key aspect of a strategic plan, one that Tom Dempsey mentioned the other day, priorities. Or another way to frame it, in my opinion, is risk management. The key to successful strategy implementation is risk management. The key to successful strategy implementation is risk management. Building a strategic plan is all about risk. And here's what I mean. When you do the analysis and the appreciation and identify all the interests that need to be protected, all the threats that must be countered, then lay out the ways and the methods to achieve the ends, there will never be enough resources to do them all. Even in the United States, with the largest GDP in the world, unless China overtook us yesterday, I didn't check, and a massive defense budget, we still don't have the resources to do everything we identify as our interest. That is where prioritization and risk management come into play. You have to decide what is the most important, then ensure there's enough means to implement your ways. Some things you will not be able to do, at least not right away. In some cases, you may have neither the ways nor the means. So you need to manage and identify ways to mitigate the risk associated with not being able to do everything. Usually a sense of urgency drives prioritization. So the things that need to be done now are at the top of the list. But as strategic leaders, we must put the rigor into the analysis and ensure that what you think is urgent is really the most important. And what is most important is prioritized and hence urgent. And frequently we get this wrong. So back to the clan militias. Okay, many experts agree, and I'll defer to those of you with recent experience on the ground, but most agree that the clan militias have played a role in keeping al-Shabaab out of certain areas. And some of the clans have worked in support of AMISOM and the FSG, the federal Somali government, or at least they've not actively hindered it. So we must ask ourselves, is it one of the highest priorities that we try to tackle the clans right now when we not only have limited ways and means, but perhaps higher short-term priorities? Better yet, we must find ways to mitigate the risk posed by the clans. Now, I have some thoughts on that, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on, and perhaps we can talk about that in the question and answer session. Let's look at private security companies quickly. In Somalia, they're proliferating like rabbits in springtime, and nobody seems concerned. I would be concerned. That's a genie that's tough to put back in the bottle. The concern with PSCs, private security companies, is that they fill a void in society resulting from a lack of a competent police force and rule of law. They undercut the authority and the perception of legitimacy of the government in the eyes of the people. And they compete with the government on unequal terms for the same pool of recruits needed to build or rebuild the government's security forces. Now, I'm not saying that the PSCs are evil. There's a role for them, and they exist in most countries around the world. However, they cannot dominate a security sector and replace what should exist from the state within the rule of law. Okay, I haven't mentioned the Somali Navy yet. And you're probably thinking, what Somali Navy? But seriously, within a strategic security plan for Somalia, is the Navy more or less important than the Army? Where does it fit within the priority list in the near term? It would seem below the Army from everything that people are doing and all the resources coming in. But if AMISOM is providing the functions of a conventional Army, why to rush to create an SNA conventional Army before focusing on a Somali Navy? Sure, Navy is more resource intensive, but think back just a few years ago in the situation off the coast of Somalia. And what about the fact that today al-Shabaab receives supplies, support, and moves by sea from the coastal areas it controls? Okay, I was going to talk a little bit about Puntland and Somaliland and where they fit within the strategic framework and priorities, because certainly they must be considered part of the security sector when you're defining it. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that and talk a little bit about resources and wrap up. Okay, resources or means. They're one of the three legs of our iconic three-legged stool that we had up earlier. So what does Somalia have in the way of resources? And currently not much, but only if you think about that from the perspective of the national treasury. The AMISOM contributors, the US, the EU, Japan, other donors, they're expending considerable resources in Somalia. Are these resources integrated into a strategic plan and aligned against prioritized ends and ways? My assessment's no. And why is that? Because it's all about interest, and not all the actors have the same interest. Now think of the players involved. You got Ethiopia, which we just heard from our colleague here, where our interests are. Kenya, Uganda, Djibouti, the US, the EU, the UN. In some cases, these interests may be competing, but they're certainly not all the same. I think everyone will agree, and we heard earlier, that the crisis in Somalia is a regional crisis. So developing a strategic plan is hard enough at the national level. So how do you manage to develop and integrate a regional plan with a national strategy? It's not easy, but the key is identifying where there's a convergence of interest. International organizations like IGAD, the AU, and the UN have a role and a responsibility in this. Somalia itself does not have the leverage to dictate how resources from external actors are prioritized and allocated in support of their national interest. Shared interest, shared threats will ideally result in a shared effort, but it takes strategic leadership and vision at all levels to make that happen. Now let me conclude by saying that I don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to offer absolute recommendations on the way ahead. I've got some ideas, but they're just that. However, I'm not convinced that there's a shared strategic vision for Somalia, nor is there a clear understanding on what is important and what is urgent. Are there higher security sector priorities than building an SNA and dismantling clan militias? And if so, shouldn't the preponderance of resources be directed that way? But to provide some context, I recently posed that exact same question to two former AMISOM commanders in separate conversations, and they both strongly disagreed with me. Each was of the opinion that the creation of a Somali army that is integrated from different clans is the #1 priority. Now that could mean one of two things. First, perhaps these commanders were only viewing the problem set through the lens of their own interest. Or two, my admittedly academic analysis of the situation without the benefit of ground observations is off the mark, and I should just defer to the practitioners. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. So with that, thank you very much.